Hey, Larry here. Acts 29 today, the journey. Coming to you from Sunny World headquarters in Chiang Mai, Thailand. I'd like to welcome all of the viewers in Thailand and from around the world to this edition where we are going to be journeying on the path of transformation, because everything that we do here feeds into that narrative of transformation, which in what I have seen throughout the world as I traveled the world for some 16 years during that period of time. The biggest thing I saw that was missing in the modern church of today is transformation. And so that's exactly why we do the journey. Okay, so we will get right into it. I'll give you just a real quick update on things here in this country, because we got this thing going on over in another part of the world, and so we have had some gas shortages here. There are some gas lines 30, 40, 50 cars long. Some stations run out of gas for a day or so, but there's usually some open and not, any lines at all. So that's kind of the situation on that front. I am old enough to remember the gas shortages in the 70s, and we could only go try to get gas if our license number ended on an even or odd number. So we had even and odd days that you could go try to get gas. And so I've waited in the lines back in the 70s, and I've been through all this before. Not that it's fun, it's not, but it is what it is. And I have a motor scooter, a 150 Honda PCX that gets about 100 miles to a gallon. So in about the 2 gallons that it holds, I can go a long time. My wife has a car, so, she deals with the gas thing. So that's kind of what it looks like here right now. So now let's get on to the important things. So we've been talking about the broad way and the narrow way, and we're finding out some meanings of words in the Greek, the original language, that changed some of the ways we kind of thought about the broad way, the broad gate, which is not a physical thing, it's a metaphor, it's a parable, and Jesus says this toward the end of the Sermon on the Mount, where he's funneling everything from the outside to the inside. He's taken what we used to do on the outside, especially in the law, and we're bringing it now into a matter of the heart. He's bringing it to the inside, and then he talks about the broad way and the narrow way. And, we assume that, he's talking about heaven and hell here. And, you could go down that road, I think, to a great degree in some cases. But when you see the original words and what they mean in the Greek, at that time, it does change kind of how we look at this parable. And so we begin to see that even after people are born again, we still have that choice, and we can actually go from the one way, and we can wander off into the other way. Or we can be in the other way and choose to look and find the other way. And that's what we're kind of getting at here. So the word that Jesus uses for the broad way in verse 13 adds another layer. And I'm not going to pronounce most of these Greek words because it doesn't really matter. But this word in the Greek, Broadway, the Broadway, it means spacious, roomy, room in every direction. So here's what matters. This Greek word appears only one time in the entire New Testament. A word that was used once and never again. And Jesus chose a word that is rare to describe the spaciousness of the road that leads to waste. Remember, that's what destruction means. Part of what destruction means in the Greek is to waste, a wasted place. No boundaries, no resistance, no pressure. That is the broad way. Not necessarily sin, not necessarily rebellion. Just uninterrupted openness with nothing being pressed and nothing being produced. So the broad way is not a punishment. And here it is, folks. This next sentence is an amazing sentence. So the broad way is not punishment. It is a waste of what you could have been. Wow. That is scary. That is so scary. The waste of what you could have been. Wow. That is something to think about. And immediately I think of the children of Israel after they failed to enter the promised land, and then having to spend 40 more years in a desert land, a wilderness of waste, instead of the land of what could have been and what should have been. So instead of the promised land, they were in a land of waste in the wilderness for another 40 years. And that was to the end of their lives physically. They had to die off so a new generation could go into the land. A waste of what you could have been. You think about what they could have been, but were not. That is the place of destruction. And you know how people in whatever, usually sports or something, famous people, and they're on their way to the top or at the top, and you know, they've got this long career or sports thing ahead of them, and you know, they're just crushing it all the way up, and then something happens. Maybe something physical happens. Maybe they get in an accident. Maybe it's some stupid decision they make. Whatever. But it takes them out of that place that they should be operating in and puts them over in a place of waste where they can't operate in that any longer because of whatever happened where it put them. And people look at them and go, man, they had so much potential. They could have been so great. They could have been number one. They could have. But something happened that took them out of that place. But the narrow way promises something called Zoe. And Zoe is not the word for life that most people think it is. The Greek has 3 words for life. Jesus chose the one that means something very specific. In verse 14, the compressed way, that is the narrow way, the compressed way, leads to Zoe. Your English Bible says life, and you hear heaven. A place you go when you die if you made all the right decisions. But Greek has 3 words for life, and they do not mean the same thing. Bios means biological existence, daily life, livelihood. The word gives us biology. Psyche means soul, life, breath, life, the animating force. The word gives us psychology. Zoe means something different from both. Zoe is essential, divine quality of life. The kind of life that belongs to God, flows from God. And the New Testament writers chose Zoe when they meant divine life, not biological survival. John 4 verse 6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the Zoe, the divine life. He does not say, I am the way to Zoe. He says, I am Zoe. He identifies himself with this word. John 17 verse 3, this is eternal Zoe, life. That they know you, the only true God. Zoe is relational, present tense. A quality of existence defined by knowing God, not a post-mortem location after you die. John 10:10, I came that they may have Zoe, life, divine life, and have it abundantly. The compressed way leads to this, not to survival after death, but to the divine quality of existence that Jesus says he himself is. But there is a second detail in verse 14 that we miss a lot, and it changes the passage. Look at the verbs in verse 13. The many are, the Greek word, entering, which means entering. Present participle. They are just going in, passively, automatically. The broad gate is open and they walk through it without searching, without deciding, without questioning, without effort. Verse 14, the few are heurisko, finding. Present participle. This is the root of the word eureka. The word means to discover after searching, to come upon something after looking for it. The few are not entering, they are finding. When you decide to leave the broad, easy, spacious way, almost immediately pressing is encountered. And at some point you might think, maybe you've missed the path. But you're not under pressure because you have missed the path. You're under pressure because you have found the path. And you've heard people say, they ask them, well, when did you realize that, you were going to do this or that? Or, when did you understand or see that this was happening or going to happen? And then the people say, well, I was doing this and then I had this eureka moment. That's when the eureka moment hit me. And this verb connects to something 7 verses earlier that no one links to this passage. Matthew 7:7, seek and you will find. The verb for find is heurisko. Same word. Jesus uses it there as a promise. Seek and you will heurisko, find. Now in verse 14 he uses it as a description. Few are the ones who heurisko, find the compressed way. The narrow way is not obvious. It's not the default. It has to be searched for. It has to be discovered. It's not obvious. It's not the automatic default. It has to be searched for. It has to be discovered. I hear the verse, and those that come to God must believe that He is, that's faith, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Diligently. Says to me a daily searching, a daily looking. We're looking for something. And we usually don't look for something more until we're dissatisfied with what we have now or where we're at now. The many just enter, but the few actually find. And you know how this feels. The difference between filling your days with motion and actually finding something. You have entered many rooms. You have walked through many open doors, but finding something real, something that cost you something to reach, that is rare. And that is what the text is describing. The destination is divine life, found only by those who search. And now you can begin to see some differences in Christendom by those who are searching for more, and those who are not searching at all. So, this was before I was born again, or born a second time. You know, I was just having my best life now. But it wasn't filling the emptiness in my life, so I started searching for the answers to why am I here? Where did I come from? And most importantly, where am I going when I leave this place? Because by 21, I had figured out that we're here, okay? I don't know where I came from, but it's obvious I'm here. So I can kind of check that one off. It doesn't matter really where I came from. I'm already here. So the question is now, what am I doing here? What am I supposed to be doing here? What is my purpose for being here? But the most important question was, I saw that people not only came into this world, but they also left this world. People were dying every day. And that was the question that haunted me. Where do we go when we die? Or do we? Or do we just disappear and all this existence on the planet was just somebody's computer game? Or you know, it makes no sense that there's not a greater purpose for being here alive on this planet than just being born and then doing something that we supposedly like or love to do our whole life, and then we die and we're gone. You know, this is a blip in time, and it didn't make any sense to me. And so I had to find something more, because it wasn't making sense. And after some time of searching, looking, I found the answers. So the road to that life is described with a pressing verb, not a size word, but a force word. And that verb has a connection to a place in the Gospels that will reframe everything we have read so far. Now we return to the word that started everything. Narrow. From phlebo, to press, as grapes, press hard upon. The verb appears 10 times in the New Testament, and every single time it means physical pressure, suffering, or affliction. Not narrow, not tightness, but pressure. Mark 3 verse 9, the crowd is pressing upon Jesus so hard that he asks for a boat to be ready so they will not crush him. The verb is phlebo. This is a body word, people pushing against flesh, not a metaphor for moral restrictions. 2 Corinthians 4 verse 8, Paul writes, we are pressed on every side but not crushed. The word for pressed is another Greek word, same root. Paul is describing physical and spiritual compression in ministry. Real pressure from real forces. 2 examples, both physical but unmistakable. The noun form of the verb appears 45 times in the New Testament, and every time your Bible says tribulation or affliction, it is that word. The standard word for suffering in the entire New Testament comes from the same root as the word Jesus used for the narrow way. And every English Bible hides this. Now here is where the passage breaks open. Gethsemane, the place where Jesus knelt the night before he was crucified, the place where he sweat great drops of blood under the weight of what was coming. The name Gethsemane comes from two Hebrew words, gat meaning press and shemana meaning oils. Gethsemane means oil press. The place where Jesus experienced the ultimate compression and then the crushing of the cross. The place where he was pressed so hard that his body produced sweat that had blood in it. That place is named the press. And the word he used in Matthew 7 for the way that leads to life is the verb form of the same concept, to press. The olive must be pressed to yield the oil. The grape must be crushed to yield the wine. And the way that leads to Zoe, the divine life, is not a tight hallway that you squeeze through. It is a press. And you know what it feels like when you're in that season where everything gets tight, relationships are an issue, and the certainty and the identity and the whole framework you built your life inside of starts closing in. And you thought something was wrong. You thought you had taken a wrong turn. But what if the pressing was not the problem? What if the pressing was the mechanism and the process? In this reading, the process, the pressing, corresponds to the inner compression that strips away what is false. The oil corresponds to what remains. What was always there but could not flow until the pressure came. The way to Zoe is not restriction, it is extraction. Something precious is inside, but it cannot be accessed without the press. I'm seeing a seed. And you take a seed, and when it's just sitting in a jar or somewhere outside of the ground, it's at ease, it's comfortable, it's having its best life now. But when you drop the seed into the ground and it dies in that ground, what was the exterior above the ground is now being peeled off. It's disintegrating, so that the image on the inside of that shell seed, that image can come forth. That shell is pressed in the soil, crushed and broken, so that the life inside can come forth. Well, we could go a long ways with that one. That is what the passage is describing. Not a moral corridor, not a behavioral checklist, a mechanism, a process of pressure applied and oil produced. And the one who walked this road most completely did it in a garden called the oil press. The pressing produces the oil. The oil is Zoe, divine life. Think of the 10 virgins. Kind of opens up a little bit more of that parable. Now, the refusal of the press is called apoleia, destruction. the wasted place of what you could have become. The foolish virgins could have become wise virgins, but they didn't, and that was their wasted place. But there's one more layer. The Sermon on the Mount tells you exactly what the broad way looks like, and it is not what you expect. Matthew 7, verse 12, closes the main body of the Sermon on the Mount with a phrase that echoes where the sermon began. This is the law and the prophets. That phrase reaches all the way back to chapter 5, verse 17. I have not come to abolish the law or the prophets. Everything between those two markers is the sermon's teaching, and verse 13 pivots, enter through the narrow gate. This is the application. This is where the listener must choose. And what follows the narrow gate passage? 4 binary warnings in a row. 2 ways, 2 trees, 2 claims, 2 builders. Each one narrows the focus from outside to inside. Choose the right path. Then discern true from false prophets. Then know that words alone fail. Then understand that only hearing plus doing survives. This progression matters. False prophets appear in verse 15 immediately after the 2 ways, the broad way and the narrow way. Because false prophets, because they, the false prophets, are the ones who disguise the broad way as the narrow way. Oh my word. Wow. Because the false prophets are the ones who disguise the broad way as the narrow way. They make the spacious road sound and feel like the compressed one. They blur the distinction. Oh my. We could spend some time on this one now, couldn't we? But I'll just say this about that. And one of the ways that they do it is through motivational methods of, if you can think it, then you can have it, you can be it, you can do it. But these man-made methods have no spiritual foundation. A motivational, psychological mind trips that these people play is like me driving by the homeless family in the field that they stay in outside and give them a motivational talk every day, stop the car and yell out at these people living in that field, hang in there folks, hang in there, your miracle's coming soon, you're doing great folks, your time will come. And I can drive by and tell them that every day and motivate them to go through another day of being outside in the rain and the cold and the wind because they have no shelter. Or I could drive by every day and give them some blocks, some bricks, and materials for a house, and some instructions on how to build one. And then one day when I drive by, they have a house to live in. That's called transformational. Not just for the life to come, but for right now. So the wide and easy way that leads to destruction is precisely what Jesus has been describing all along as living with merely external righteousness. The narrow and difficult pressed way is the vision he has cast for righteousness that is more and deeper than behavior. The broad way might not be immoral, might not be rebellion, might not be atheism. But here's what it is. The broad way is external religion performed without interior transformation. It's the Pharisees' road. Oh boy. The broad way is external religion performed without interior transformation. Which, by the way, see the broad way, external religion performed, that's what it is. And you see that all the time. I mean, there's whole denominations and flavors of religions. Some call themselves Christians, some don't, but it's all external religion performed. You know, it's for what you see on the outside. They've got the robes and the, you know, all the paraphernalia and all kinds of costumes they wear. It's all outward. But there's no interior transformation, because the interior transformation comes on another path, a completely different path, and they haven't found that path. So they're stuck in that wasted place of external religion performance, like the Pharisees. The one that looks good is manageable and outwardly definable, but very spacious on the inside, because nothing is being pressed and nothing is being extracted and nothing is being produced. The compressed way is what the entire sermon has been building toward. A righteousness that goes deeper than behavior. An inner life that is being pressed. And out of the pressing comes Zoe, divine life. And you have felt this. The realization that the virgin of faith you were performing, the one that felt manageable but never cost you anything inside, might just be the spacious road the text is describing. Not the road of evil, or the road of ease, but your best life now. The wasted place of what you could have become but chose not to. Not because someone punished you, but because you stayed on the road where nothing was being pressed and nothing was being produced. Wow. See, this is the place where so many are. And I've been there and done that. You know my story. I was in the building thing for 22 years. And, it was what it was. But the real pressing wasn't there. And so there was nothing in my life really being pressed, and nothing was really being produced. I was just going through the motions. And it was pretty much a Sunday only deal. And it wasn't until I started looking and searching and finding the Word of God for myself that anything began to change. The compression that extracts the oil, the mechanism and the process that produces Zoe, the road that has to be searched for because it is not the automatic default. I see the automatic default as the Sunday morning only building loop that they push you into as soon as you're born again. You gotta go to the building on Sunday, you gotta tithe, you gotta do this, you gotta do that, and that's it. They ingrain this in your head that this is the life. See, this is it. Well, I didn't have to search for that. It was just an open door. This is what you do. So you just walk in and walk right in, sit right down. I just walked in and sat down, And so that's all I knew. And it wasn't until years later that I began to search. I began to search because I was in an automatic default. But I wasn't satisfied. My hunger wasn't being filled. My thirst wasn't being quenched. And so I had to start looking around. I had to start looking outside the box because I had to have more. So I searched and searched and searched. And I found another path. The road that has to be searched for, because it is not the automatic default. The few who find it are not the doctrinally correct. They are the ones who stop entering automatically and start searching deliberately, and submit to the pressing. The broad way is religion without compression. The narrow way is the press that produces divine life, and the text gives you one verb, perisco, from the word find, that tells you the compressed way is not forced on anyone. It has to be searched for. And that's why I was so amazed that so many people around me in the building were just like, they were just content to do that. They seemed satisfied. Nobody was forcing them to do anything at all. They were just happy. But I wasn't happy. And when I began searching, of course, and finding some things, I would talk to them about it, and they'd look at me like a cow at a new gate, It's like, what are you talking about, man? Go sit down. We're not looking for anything else. We're in the default. This is all you do. This is what you do. This is what it is. word find tells you that the compressed way is not forced on anyone. It has to be searched for. Okay, I think I got time to go through this conclusion, and then we're done with this particular series. So my conclusion is, so in the context of Christians that are born again, this is a decision that has to be made individually. Will I settle into a life of ease, stay in my comfort zone, rely on a one-time decision and a prayer that was said some years ago, and do a part-time religious loop, Sunday only weekend warrior life, and then Monday go back to the defeated life that you are so accustomed to? No spiritual growth, no development, no fruit being developed, only to find out later that you have wasted your life of ease for what could have been and what should have been. Will you look around with a growing spiritual hunger for more of God and start asking questions? Why is this all there seems to be? Why are people satisfied with so little of what they could have in God? To the point of actually starting to look for something more. And then in your hunger and thirst, start reading the Word for yourself, worshiping in private, praying in tongues for edification, the revelation gift, and fasting. And in the searching for more of God, finding the way that is pressed, crushed, and hard, that will cost you everything, but it produces divine life. Giving up what you cannot keep to gain that which you can never lose. The path that so few ever find. Well, the good news is, just because others won't, just because others won't leave their best life now on the cruise ship, just because they don't want to pray in the Spirit and feed on the Word and spend time with the Father in intimacy or fast, doesn't mean that you can't. Because you can. If what? If you will. God knows that you can, but what He doesn't know is if you will. Only you know that. So let's get on the way of pressing, transformation, and stay on this way because it produces oil. The oil produces the light of life, Zoe, divine life, not just for eternity, but for right now also. We as believers are all on the same journey, that is a spiritual journey, but we are not all on the same path. Some have chosen the easy, comfortable, and wide path that leads to wasted days and wasted nights, not even realizing the truth of what could have and should have been for their life. But others, not satisfied with that way, begin to question, research, look for more of God, and find the path of pressing and producing that leads to divine life. One path is easy and comfortable, but produces nothing. The other is hard and pressed, but produces life. Choose wisely which path you will travel on. There will be many on the one path and very few on the other. Why? Because this path of pressing has to be found. Well, oh man, that really cleared some stuff up for me about coming out of that one and finding the other, you know, coming off the cruise ship and finding the submarine and all that. Amazing stuff. Well, hope you enjoyed that. Hope you got something out of it. And God willing, I'll see you on the midweek edition, where we will continue the journey. I love you, God loves you, and we'll